Bill Calogero, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me, Russ.
Bill Calogero, perhaps better known as Billy C., is the host of the Talkin' Boxing with Billy C. show, the world's only daily boxing podcast. To learn more about the program, visit billycboxing.com. In addition to being a talk show host, Billy C. has just released his first book titled Tom Molineaux, From Bondage to Baddest Man on the Planet. The book focuses on the history of bare-knuckle boxer Tom Molineaux, who lived a life of both triumph and tragedy. Bills, why write a book about a fighter very few people have heard of?
That's a good question. I think the bottom line was my interest in the guy when I discovered him. It's kind of to me it was an interesting scenario. I had it was quite a while ago. I had gotten a series of books. It was the Boxania series, and it was written by Pierce Egan that chronicled bare-knuckle boxing from the 1700s all the way up until the early 1800s. And, well, how I got that whole series of books is a story in itself. But anyway, as I was flipping through and reading what I thought was an extremely hard read, the style of Pierce Egan and the writing techniques of the late 1700s and early 1800s, which was very hard to read, plus the definitions of what they called, like, stamina was bottom and stuff like that. So there was a learning curve. So anyway, as I was reading through it, I came across the fight, which I called The Fight, which is Tom Cribb against Tom Molineaux. And I'm reading Pierce Egan's descriptions of both of the combatants, and he describes Tom Molineaux as a dark-skinned black man, black as coal, the black, the more were all descriptions that were used to describe Tom Molineaux. And he gets to Tom Cribb, who was the champion of England, and Lily White, white as milk, were the descriptors used for Tom Cribb. And as I'm reading this, and I was going through his coverage. He was actually a ringside reporter. He was actually the first sports reporter historically, but he is describing this fight, how brutal it was. And I'm reading page after page. I'm going, oh, God, ooh, I'm feeling these punches. And he gets to the part where he says, this was the most brutal, up to the round that he refers to. He said this was the most brutal fight that he had ever witnessed. And he said the two combatants were so disfigured and covered in blood that you couldn't distinguish them apart. And it just was such a statement that just captivated me. And I was like, I got to learn more about Tom Molineaux. And that's when I started doing all the research on the guy, and had no idea of where his beginnings were and ultimately where his tragic ending was.
Well, how did you separate fact from legend? I mean, this is 200-year-old information. How were you able to deal with that?
Another great question. When I started the book, I started the project on the book, and I belong to the IBRO organization, and I had met Colleen Aycock and Mark Scott, and they were working on a project about the first black champions. And I told them about the book I was working on, and at that time, the layout of my book was going to be more of what my interpretation was of Molineaux's life, because of exactly what you said. You know, the data that was available, I was finding I had a really hard time getting. So they asked me to take my book and shorten it into an essay for their book. And once I did that, I realized that my whole train of thought changed, and I wanted to write a book about Tom Molineaux that was 100% based on fact and not legend. So I used that essay almost as a guide, and I ended up, it took me 7 years worth of research to track down everything I possibly could on Tom Molineaux that was written in newspapers during the time. There were stuff like the boat that he was on. I tracked where that was, and ultimately, at the end of the day, the book turned out to be about 150 pages, and the reason was I didn't want to incorporate, fiction with what I uncovered as fact.
Before we get into the life of Tom Molineaux, we know boxing today is obviously quite different than it was in the early 19th century. What were the rules of bare-knuckle boxing, and how does it differ from modern boxing?
Well, the bottom line was this. And the only things you couldn't do was you weren't able to hit a man when he was down. You weren't able to gouge out their eyes. And a round was dictated by when a fighter hit the ground. When a fighter hit the ground, they had 30 seconds to come to fight, which they termed come back to scrap. And if they weren't able to, the fight was ruled over. Aside from that, anything went. They could use their arms, they could throw you down, they could punch you, they could kick you, they could do whatever they wanted. Almost like what we call MMA today, which incidentally is one of the reasons I'm not a big MMA fan, because I have always followed the you can't hit a guy while he's down rule. So that was pretty much it. It was a rough and tumble sport back during Molineaux's time.
Okay, so let's get into the young life of Tom Molineaux. Who was he as a young man before he became famous?
Well, he was born a slave on a Virginia plantation. That we do know. There was some discrepancies of when he was born, but I was able to get that. And his father, let me take a step back. His father was actually a guy who learned how to fight during the Revolutionary War. He was fighting in the Revolutionary War and picked up the boxing skill because he was on the British side. He was actually an aide for a British commander. And when the war was over, he got put back on his plantation, and that's where Tom Molineaux learned to defend himself. However, his father died at a fairly young age, and Tom Molineaux was a very strong young man, and ultimately got his shot at fighting and his shot at freedom.
But how does he make his way from the United States over to England?
That is a mystery in a sense. Basically, what happened was he was born a slave, and on the plantation in which he lived, the son of the owner, his name was Algernon Molineaux. At the time, the slaves took the name of the owners / plantation, and he was kind of a gambler. He was a sports guy, gambler, and what he did was he was out one night at a party with another plantation owner, and the other plantation owner was bragging about a slave that he had that could beat any other slave in the area. They used to have slave fighting as entertainment. And Algernon said that he had a slave that would beat him, and they made this wager that he had a few too many drinks, and when he woke up the next morning, he realized that the whole plantation was on the line, and it became a very serious situation. And his biggest, strongest slave was his guy, the guy that was kind of his companion, and that was Tom Molineaux. And as you read the book, you learn some stuff about how he got Tom Molineaux to fight. But in a nutshell, it was his freedom was offered and some money. So he won the fight, and he hightailed it out of there, out of Virginia, out of the plantation. I mean, as you know, the stories go that a lot of times slave owners weren't honorable, and this had to be something that Tom thought about, and he left the plantation after the fight with basically the clothes on his back and the money he had been paid, and ended up in New York. And he got on a ship and went over to England without any friends or nothing. It's considering he wasn't an educated man, it's the journey to England alone must have been quite the experience for Tom Molineaux.
And was life better for a black man in England versus the States?
Well, that's a great question because technically England liked people to believe that it was. Now, keep in mind, the United States, where Tom Molineaux was from, was only 33 years old, and they were in their infancy. Policies in the government weren't even fully formed yet. Slavery was full swing, and in England, there wasn't slavery, but they definitely looked upon, black people as inferior, but they didn't want to publicize it. And one of the indicators with that was Tom Molineaux. When he landed in England, he was very brash. He was seeking out the best fighter in England, who was Tom Cribb, and because of his physique, he was, and because bragging and just this aurora about this guy who had seemed to have no fear. People were attracted to him, especially the women. And one of the things that I always was like, geez, this guy was known to stroll down Main Street in London with white women on either arm and several others trailing him. I mean, this definitely raised eyebrows to the people of England.
Was bare-knuckle boxing legal? You say slave fighting. Would they allow this?
Well, bare-knuckle boxing was legal in England. It was really big in England. It was more organized and stuff like that. Slave fighting, and when I did my research, when I went to Mount Vernon, Virginia, on the George Washington plantation, they virtually have all of that stuff locked up. They want people to believe. They, meaning the United States government, wants people to believe it didn't exist. And that's not true, It did exist, and it was very barbaric. And in a lot of cases, the fighters, even if they won, passed away after the fights. I mean, sometimes the fights were to the death. So it was legal in both England and the United States, but it was much more structured in England.
Were there any other black fighters fighting in England at that time?
Black fighters actually had been there. As a matter of fact, the guy who became Tom Molineaux's trainer, so to speak, and manager, Bill Richmond, had a similar story. He was also born a slave, and he too was an assistant for a British soldier during the Revolution, like Tom Molineaux's dad. And when the war was over, he was brought back to England, and he actually taught boxing, and he was an earlier opponent for Tom Cribb. So there was a connection there that people will learn in the book.
So how does Tom Molineaux get around to actually getting this fight with Tom Cribb?
Well, Bill Richmond had a lot to do with it. Plus, as people will learn, he was shunned by some other trainers/managers. He ends up with Bill Richmond, and Bill Richmond taught him some of what they referred to as the finer arts of the sweet science compared to that day. And the problem that Tom Molineaux had was that he was just loving the celebrity that he was in England. I mean, this guy couldn't walk into a pub without, all they refer to them as the sports, buying him drinks, buying him food, wanting to just be with him and hang out with him. And he loved that. This is a guy that was never subjected to that, and he loved it. So the discipline was an issue for Tom Molineaux, and one of the things I point out in the book is that Bill Richmond, of all people, should have looked out for Molineaux, but instead kind of looked at Tom Molineaux as a cash cow and kind of let him go crazy because that meant more money, the more money in his pocket.
So why should Tom Molineaux be considered the first American heavyweight champion?
Well, here's the deal. The fight was, the champion of England was Tom Cribb. Tom Molineaux was regarded as the American heavyweight champion. For all intent and purposes, he was the American heavyweight champion. Now, this was, we didn't, in the United States, we didn't take care and do good record keeping, and that was one of the dead ends. Virtually no articles written about Tom Molineaux except for the fight when it got back to the United States. So a lot of his fights were documented. Again, so I couldn't come up with an exact number of fights, but the one thing that seems to be across the board is that when he left the United States, he left with the crown American heavyweight champion. So therefore, when he arrived in England, and then he and Tom Cribb eventually fought, you had the American title and the British title on the line, which ultimately made it the first world title event. Unfortunately for Tom Molineaux, our history books show that the first American heavyweight champion came, 40-something years after Tom Molineaux.
And this was known as the fight of the century.
One of them. Many fights have been termed fight of the century, just like one recently between Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather. But yes, this was the biggest fight recorded at the time. It was worldwide recognition. There were a lot of people there, and as a matter of fact, they had to trudge through mud. And you read about this in the book. It was no easy feat to get there. As a matter of fact, back in those days, there were, boxing was considered illegal in England, but it was like illegal that one just closed their eyes to, including the local police department and everything else. After the Tom Molineaux era, it even got worse with the legality. So the promoters were able to promote fights, have 10,000 people show up, and on the tickets that they sold had no location, no date. It was like an underground word of mouth network that was just phenomenal. I talk about promoters. They made Don King even look bad,
So whatever happens to Tom Molineaux, does he ride off into the sunset, or how did it go?
Absolutely not. Tom Molineaux got robbed in that first fight blatantly, and it's documented not once, not twice, but 3 times in the same fight. That could have been over. Going back to a question you asked earlier, England, although they claim that they were not prejudiced, they certainly didn't want to lose their championship, their guy, to a black man, a black slave, so to speak, too. So as you will learn when you read the book, that he was blatantly robbed in that fight 3 times, and ultimately, he losing the fight when he just was exhausted. They did have a rematch, but the rematch was not the same Tom Molineaux. He became more famous after that fight because most people that read about the fight and were even at the fight knew that Tom Molineaux should have won the fight. And Tom Cribb, on the other hand, went all out and got in better shape than he was in, and Tom Molineaux did the opposite. And the second fight was nowhere near the first fight, and Tom Cribb won that fight without much of a problem.
Well, during the time, the Brits were having a lot of animosity with the French, right? It was the Napoleon Era. So the last thing they wanted was their boxing champion to lose to a black man.
Exactly, and not only that, he was an American black man, and like I mentioned earlier, the revolution had just taken place 33 years earlier. So there was a lot of things. Although they wanted, the Brits want, be on top. They were, a world power. They certainly did not want to lose to a black man, and specifically a black American.
Yeah. So how's the book doing?
So far so good. We're doing pretty well. I have no idea of how it's selling on, Amazon or Barnes & Noble, but I do know what people are requesting direct copies from us that are signed and stuff, and it's doing pretty well. Traditionally boxing books, aren't huge sellers, but I have a lot of faith that this book will do well. I think it attracts more than the boxing fan. I think it's a historical perspective. I think it's something that all people should read and learn about. And one of my goals in the book is to make it right. This guy has to be added to the history the way he is. He's in the history books as being, everything with the fight and stuff is all documented in the boxing history. But I feel that we need to make it right in terms of him being the American heavyweight champion, because in boxing we actually have the first American heavyweight champ. Then we have the first black American heavyweight champ. We've actually divided it there. And the first black American champ, whose name was George Godfrey, 75 years after Tom Molineaux. So I believe that the history should be rewritten correctly.
You should send a signed copy to the NAACP.
I should, and I hope that the book takes on a life of its own. I'm confident that it will. I also believe that this particular story would make a great movie. I really do. I think it would make a great movie, and I'm hoping for that kind of thing in the future.
Yeah, because I was interested about the fact that you were writing about such an obscure fighter. I mean, you could have written about Sugar Ray Leonard or Mike Tyson or Muhammad Ali and probably sold a lot more copies.
Well, then you could also look at it on the other side of the coin, like so many other people have written books about them. I wanted to write something that was about someone that people don't know about. And when I got interested in this guy, I really feel that there was an injustice done to this man, and it was hard enough that he had to live his life as a slave, and, he broke away from that, and he accomplished more than he probably thought he ever could, and here we are, 200 years later, still treating the guy, and I think that was my platform. That's what got me going with it, and I just hope other people see it through my eyes. And that's what I tried to do. I tried to make it a no-nonsense book. I tried to bring the readers back in time, and based on some comments and reviews I've read about the book, it's working. People are feeling that, and I just hope we sell a whole bunch of copies.
Yeah, I looked on Amazon. It's all 5-star reviews at this point for the Tom Molineaux book. Tell me about the Billy C. Show, how that got started and where it's going.
Well, Talking Boxing with Billy C., actually, we're in our 12th year already. And the history with that, real quick, is I owned a gym. I had gotten involved with a gym in Poughkeepsie, New York. And my background in boxing, I was a promoter, and I was a lot of things in the sport, but being a promoter, I started thinking of ways to promote the gym. And believe it or not, my cousin, Jeremy, who was in the music business, and he said, they have this new technology out, you should, do a show. And I never had any background in doing anything in radio or anything like that. But I thought it might have been a good idea to add a little interest to get people to come to the gym. So what we did was we put together a pilot, and we ran a 1-hour show, and we publicized it with the gym that there's a live radio show going on. And at the time, we recorded it. It wasn't live or anything. The following week, we were picked up by a sports network, and we started doing the show on a weekly basis, live from Snoop's gym. And then it evolved from there. It went to a 2-hour weekly show. Then at one point we started doing a daily show, a daily morning show, and then we still had our weekly 2-hour show. and then we went all out. We did the morning show was an hour, and then we just did 2 hours every day, and it evolved into what you have today. Our big goal at the time was getting on the radio. Our first radio station was up in Rochester, New York, and we got on radio. Then ultimately we got on television, and now we're back to focusing on the Internet, because I personally think that our presence on the Internet is much more accessible, and that's where we're going today.
So how can my audience listen to your program? Where do they tune in?
Well, you can check your local radio. We are on 38 stations throughout the United States, and I think we're on 6 Canadian stations. We can also be found on television through Cablevision and Google, their new network they have. It's primarily out west in the States. But right now, the easiest way, really, is on our website or on our YouTube channels, BillyCBoxing.com or YouTube/Talkin' Boxing. That's Talkin, no G in Talkin', and Boxing. And we put up our shows, so we have an internet version, a radio version, and we also have a podcast version of the show as well.
And if my guests want to pick up an autographed copy or a book, how can they do that? Is that also done through the website?
They can visit our website, www.BillyCBoxing.com, and on the left-hand side is a section called Book Club, where incidentally I put all recommended boxing and beyond type books there. But right on the top you'll see my book and some instructions where they can get a signed copy. Or they could just go up to the Barnes & Noble or Amazon, or where all good books are sold, and grab a copy off the shelf. I'm working on another book. The next one is going to be about Sal Rocky Senecola or Elmer Violent Ray. I will be making a decision on which one is going to be first over the next couple of weeks. It's all a matter of logistics right now. Which book? I'm going to do a book on both, but depending on which one gets done first. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, geez, this guy's picking 2 more obscure names. But I think that's going to be my MO, Russ. I mean, I think I'm going to start being the guy who writes about fighters that people need to learn about, rather than the fighters that everyone thinks they know about already.
Oh, good for you. It's great that you're keeping the history alive. Your book is Tom Molineaux From Bondage to... Oh, I fucking lost the title here somewhere. What's the name of the book?
Tom Molineaux From Bondage to Baddest Man on the Planet.
All right, your book, okay, it's Tom Molineaux From Bondage to Baddest Man on the Planet. Pick it up from Amazon or Barnes & Noble, wherever fine books are sold, as Billy says. Billy, thank you so much for being a guest on the program.
Russ, I appreciate it, and anytime I'd love to come back. So you just say the word, and I'll be here.